Hello, my name is Leslie Williamson. I'm the founder and executive director of the Center for School Success. CSS is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to help students who struggle with learning be more successful in school and in life. CSS has a number of services, one of which is a transdisciplinary learning assessment with a team of clinicians representing the developmental peditrician, a clinical psychologist, and a learning specialist. The focus of the assessment is to better understand how a student learns best. The clinicians spend a great deal of time helping the students shift their focus from what they can't do to what they can do. All of the students we see are very bright, yet for some reason or other, they just aren't able to do as well as they should in school. Most of these students are not eligible for special education services because they don't meet the criteria for a learning disability. Over the past 9 years, we found some interesting learning trends emerge. For example, many of the students we see struggle with the ability to modulate their attention, to juggle multiple tasks at one time, for example, doing a long division math problem or being able to write a long sentence or a paragraph, and also to just be able to express themselves either verbally or in written form. Despite these difficulties and set beliefs, almost every student we see has strong higher order thinking skills. The frustration and anxiety that they experience as a result of struggling in school, but knowing that they have the ability, they just can't show what they know, can be profound, and it affects almost every aspect of their life. I would like to share with you a discussion among the CSS Transdisciplinary team regarding the dynamic nature of a CSS learning assessment and how together the clinicians offer a unique lens and clarity on how a student learns best. The clinic team includes Dr. Mike Kilcullen, who's our developmental pediatrician, Dr. Stephen Atkins, clinical psychologist, Nancy Tracy, our clinic coordinator, Beth Reed, senior learning specialist, Charity Gray, our other learning specialist, and Dee LaCrosse, who is a clinical psychologist. A group of clinicians representing different fields using a transdisciplinary approach. How does that facilitate a more complete understanding of how a child learns? Nancy, do you want to start and just give us a little?
The student will start off seeing Dr. Kilcullen, and then there'll be a short break. The student will then meet with one of our psychologists, another short break, and then meets with one of our learning specialists. While the student is working with the clinicians, we have a one-way observation mirror, and the family is sitting behind that mirror with one of our other psychologists who's the family liaison for that day, and they observe the entire assessment. One of the reasons that we do this is to really give the families the opportunity to understand their child perhaps in a new and different way. And the role of the family liaison is to really explain as the assessment day unfolds what's happening on the other side of the mirror, why certain activities and tasks were chosen, and what the student's response is telling us about their learning profile, so that the family really gets information in real time about what's happening on the day of the assessment. After the 3 sessions are completed, the family will go out to lunch for about an hour, and the clinicians are going to meet as a team to talk about their findings. So even though the individual clinicians might talk about what it was that they saw during their particular session, the emphasis of that meeting is for the team members to talk together to come up with a consensus about what those initial findings are going to be. Because when the family and the student return from lunch, 1 or 2 of the clinicians are going to sit down with the student and talk with that child about what the clinicians see as the student's main learning strengths, as well as the challenges that they may be coming up against, and then also to explain to the student why. One of the great things about this particular time, which we call the demystification process, is that the clinicians can use real-time examples of what they did with the student that is proof to the student of why in fact a particular activity or task has given the clinician information about what their strengths really are. When the family leaves for the day, the clinicians then sit down together for about another 2 hours, and through using the same shared language, they really take a look at all the information that was gathered prior to the assessment and during the assessment to come up with a very thorough understanding of this child as a learner.
Steve, would you like to describe the family liaison role and how that unfolds during the course of the day, starting with when the family arrives?
Sure. You know, after they've been assessed and looked at through Nancy's lens, the family comes in the morning, and basically, usually the student and the family are thinking that this is going to be a traditional assessment. And in the past, and especially here in America, what you have is a student will go into a small room with one person and meet with that one person for a while and be assessed. But yet, when you look at this facility, they walk in and see that this is a very different type of setting. And my role, or Dee LaCrosse's role as family liaison, is to help them to kind of integrate into the understanding of how different the assessment will be today. Initially, what we'll do is just give them a tour, let them see where everything is, everything from where we'll be meeting to talk about the data that we collect during the day, all the way down to the facilities and where they'll be sitting, and explaining the two-way mirror so that the family will understand that they won't be seen behind the mirror, but will be able to see everything that the student and the team does together on the other side of the mirror. And we go through things like limit of confidentiality and talk about mental health bill of rights, and we have some documents signed. And then as we move into the assessment piece, they usually start off with Michael and then transition over into Dee, and then meeting with one of the learning specialists. The whole time I would be sitting behind the mirror with the family. And I have to say, having done evaluations for 15, 16 years now, we've been doing these types of assessments since 2003, I believe it is. And I had no idea in any way what the impact would be on me professionally as the family liaison, what that role would do to my professional life. Because I thought, hey, it's great, we're going to be able to work together in an interdisciplinary team or a multidisciplinary team, but as we all got to know each other and work together closely, I think that we realized that we've moved into what we now call a transdisciplinary team. And the role of the family liaison was probably the most valuable role that I took out of this. I mean, it's wonderful to sit with the students and do the assessment piece, but to actually sit behind the mirror with the family and to be able to explain to them as we get into this dialogue about what you're going to hear, what the other members do in their particular roles. The dynamic impact on the family and on the student is invaluable. And having been trained as a family therapist and as a learning specialist and a clinical psychologist, all of those roles came together in one nice package that we could then sit down and talk with families and explain, this is why your child is acting this way at home. This is why your son or daughter is thriving in this type of setting. And it's just palpable. I can't put into language the impact that the family has behind the mirror. Everything from tears to laughter to fatigue to joy. They leave here. And what we usually say to the students, I know Dee says this and I say it as well when we sit down to do the assessment part, is that by the time you end today's assessment, you're going to know more about your brain than most students know on earth. And it's the truth, because when they leave, they know why they do certain things well and where the breakdown points are, if you want to talk about strengths or weaknesses. But the family also leaves and goes, I cannot tell you what this meant to be able to sit and watch and see my son or daughter go through what they went through and the impact that it's had on not only the student, but also on us, and how we've been doing what I call this dance at home around homework, or this dance around worrying about school, and it's invaluable. I think the family liaison role is my favorite role in the assessments we do here at the Center for School Success. So.
I just wanted to add one point to what Steve said, and that is that we're also always upfront with the kids about letting the children who come here for assessments know that part of our process, part of it's inherent in what we do, is that their family is going to be observing them throughout the day. So part of what the family liaison will do during the morning introductions is to show them that two-way mirror, how it works, and explain that part of the reason that we do this is because we want it to be a shared learning experience for the family and their student.
And, I appreciate you saying that, because when they come in, they're usually intrigued by the fact that they can't see what's going on in the other room, so they want to go over on that side and sit and see someone speak on the other side, and they'll often look through the mirror. But the family will sit there, and I omitted the fact that we often now have teachers, learning specialists coming from schools, sitting in the room with us and taking these copious notes about what they're seeing during the assessment, and also giving feedback continually on how much they appreciate the fact that they have the opportunity to speak with a pediatrician, clinical psychologist, learning specialist, while the assessment's going on, to talk about the neurodevelopmental constructs that we're assessing during the day. So,
I think another important point in that is that the teachers and the parents on the other side of the mirror are also able to validate for us that, yes, that's the student I see, or no, we've never seen that before, so that we get an idea of what our assessment measures are really showing us about the student.
Great. So the first person the student usually works with is the pediatrician. And Mike, do you want to say a little bit about the kinds of things that you cover in your section of the assessment and any other distinctive features?
Well, I think the origin of my interest in this area came from the training and experience that I had had with the typical medical model. And it doesn't really explain or adequately provide input or feedback to families and students that would lead to their success in school. And that model, of course, is very pathology-based, and as Nancy so eloquently pointed out, the emphasis of the our team assessment is pointing out the strengths that the student has, which is a unique way to look at things and really embellishes the typical medical issues that we struggle with. I look at, as had been previously noted, we look at the historical data, which is a very important component of where we decide to start and how we proceed with it. But we review that information. What are the risk factors? What are the assets that the child brings to it? And you review that medical history and how it may contribute to what's going on. The actual assessment model is looking at some of the fundamental developmental skills and developmental abilities with an eye on how they are able to understand and process information and produce information with the skills that they have. I think it's another component of the multidisciplinary group that has a common language that allows us some of the flexibility. For example, when I do an assessment, I can modify my tool in the process of doing the assessment, which is a unique aspect of assessments in general. In most, they follow a script where you're bound by the rules of the test to assess in a certain fashion and using certain components to do the assessment. We can make changes while we're doing it, so we get a better and more complete look at how components of their neurodevelopmental skills are affecting them in either a positive or a negative way. The observational component is also a very important part of the medical contribution to it. I can't produce what I think is a quality look at the students' functioning, even from a medical standpoint, without the contribution of the other professionals here. I think the advantage that it gives is that it takes it out of the domain of pathology and puts it into the domain of how what a student brings and how his environment is affecting the progress that he makes or she makes in school. We do a more typical medical component to it in saying that I think one of the roles that I play is that I can say that there is a medical history here that contributes to how a student is performing, and we need to keep that medical history in mind. What does it add to the risk factors that may be presenting with problems that he faces or she faces in school? So the medical part of this, again, keeping in mind that this is a very fluid system, just raises the level of certain issues that have a developmental and medical basis that allows us to draw some of our conclusions.
Excellent. Thanks. So after a 15-minute break or so, the student then works with the psychologist, and DeLaCrosse, talking in your role as a psychologist, what are some of the things that you cover in your session?
I think the first thing that I want to say about the role of the psychologist, especially in contrast to having done many, many years of traditional testing, being formal in-school assessment tools where there are scores and procedures that have to be followed, that this model has really provided me the opportunity to tailor assessments to every individual student that comes through the door. And part of that is reviewing the file, which people have talked about, and the extensive history and gathering that information. But it then gives me the opportunity to take pieces of assessment instruments if I don't feel like I need to do an entire memory scale or an entire assessment instrument for language. That having known what some of the history is, I can really focus in on, okay, expressive language, there are a lot of questions about that. There are a lot of questions about somebody's short-term memory. So it's the individual nature and picking and choosing and tailoring my assessment to that student. And as Mike said, I also have the luxury of watching Dr. Coquelin go first, and then even at that point I can make an assessment in my own mind as to, well, I'm getting a lot of information about this, but we really need to pull more information and learn more about this part of the student. So it's a fluid process. It's also a very dynamic process that even in the moment, I oftentimes have the opportunity to change the direction that I'm going. For instance, if I'm getting the sense that somebody is really more of a visual learner than an auditory learner, I can adjust what I'm doing and even how I'm asking questions. That if it's a very auditory subtest, for example, and I'm just losing the student and they're getting frustrated or they're getting more anxious and they're beginning to shut down, I can essentially change the presentation, I guess would be the best way to do it, and make it a visual process. So I'm getting the same information about what the student knows or doesn't know in terms of information, but how they access it, how they think about it, how they process it, it allows me to tease that out right in the moment. And I think that that's a really important difference than very traditional assessments.
Dee, can you talk a little bit about how you talk with students in the moment in order to gauge, what's going on and how they're processing or producing
Right.
information?
I usually start out when I sit down with somebody by saying, in many ways, it's not about getting the right or the wrong answer. It's about how you think about things, and that's what we're really here to try to figure out. So while we're going through an assessment instrument, I might stop and say, okay, can you tell me how you got to that answer? Or could you tell me what you were thinking about beforehand? So I get, again, right in the moment, ideas about what their profile is. And in addition to that, I'm always thinking about little mini demystifications along the way, providing the student with information about, oh, I noticed when you did this that you were counting on your fingers, or pointing out strategies that they might be using in the moment. And saying, did you notice how when you did that, that really worked for you? Or how about over here, you had tried it this way and you just checked out for a while and I lost you. And it's the in the moment piece that really allows me to get a deeper understanding of what the student's profile is.
I just wanted to add to that, because I think that is really the gift that we provide here that's so unique, that the parents are sitting behind the glass and there's this opportunity to say, oh, wow, in that moment, an awareness, a recognition, as well as for the student sitting with a clinician, they have that same kind of aha moment. Oh, I'm using this and it's enabling me to come up to show what I know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's in those moments of understanding that is very unique.
Right.
Yeah, I think the evaluation process, one thing that can't be emphasized too much is the common language that we use, and that makes this communication among the professionals so much easier. The traditional assessment spent a lot of time on medical language and psychological language and educational language when you're describing what's going on. What we use is a common language that's kind of demystified by the family liaison person for parents. What are the skills and issues that we're talking about? And that common language and terminology is also a unique aspect of this type of assessment. But also, I think our goal is, how do we describe this student as best as we can? The best description you get leads to the best prescription that you get for them, and I think we need to keep that in mind as a unique aspect of this kind of assessment as well.
So the final person that the student sees on that day is the learning specialist, and we have two, but the student will only see one of them. Charity Gray and Beth Reed are our two learning specialists. And do you want to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that you work with the student? I know up to this point, the student really has been doing activities and tasks with the psychologist and the pediatrician that are not necessarily school-based. And as they move in with the learning specialist, all of a sudden they have to work on reading, writing, and math. So. Not always so happily about that.
Well, as several have already mentioned, our goal when the student comes to Center for School Success is to find out how the student learns best, not to generate scores about what he or she can't do. So the demystification process starts first thing in the morning at 8 o'clock, when we start talking to the student about what we already know from what we've gathered in data that the family and school have sent in, what we already know to be their strengths and what we're already observing. And that in fact, we already know they're smart, and we just want to figure out how they're smart so they can best use their brain. Our piece is reading, writing, math, and spelling, which are usually the things giving everybody the most headaches. And because we've had the luxury of sitting behind the mirror and watching the psychologist and the pediatrician, we already have a pretty good idea of what's breaking down and why. So part of our time we spend teasing out reading, writing, and math issues that might still be unanswered, but a good portion of our time we use to give specific strategies, and then having that ongoing conversation with the student.
Exactly. Yeah. So they experience a success in that moment with some material that has previously been frustrating, challenging, mystifying, and they have that experience of utilizing their aptitude, their intelligence to overcome something that they were struggling with. Yeah. Well, just because there's some some of the children who come here, the learners who come, they come with a sort of mantle, or they've been hearing terminology, oh, you're not trying hard enough, or you're lazy. And what we have the great opportunity to do is to show them that that is in fact not true, that they're trying incredibly hard. They're working in perhaps an inefficient way, struggling with the details as opposed to starting with the big picture. They're not utilizing tools that they have access to because they don't understand how those tools will support them. So it's to feel, I think, to feel seen and understood, and then to be shown tools to empower these young people. It's just an incredible opportunity and gift. So.
And, the meta message of what's being said here is that this is absolutely, without a doubt, a therapeutic intervention, because these kids, these students, these families, these teachers, and we all come in with an understanding of how this student is being seen in the classroom. And then all of a sudden, as they sit down and start working with this transdisciplinary team, something fascinating happens. It's not multidisciplinary, it's not interdisciplinary, it's transdisciplinary. And what we mean by that is that all of a sudden we transcend all of our perceptions into understanding how this child does well. And this trans perception makes a huge shift from the moment they leave here. Often every student comes in with trepidation. They're nervous, about being observed by their parents and teachers and us. But by the end of the day, they're like, I don't want to go. Can you come back tomorrow? This was wonderful because they are experiencing success. And it's so powerful because they all of a sudden can wrap their minds around who they are as a learner. And I want to say that again, who they are as a learner, because that is the most profound gift you can give anyone. Because once they start learning how to learn, I don't really care what they learn, but once they start learning how to learn, how they become metacognitive, where their strengths and weaknesses are, they can then learn anything they want.
And you can see from beginning of the day till end a transformation occur in the student themselves. And that's a very powerful point for parents, for sitting behind the mirror watching this child who is very anxious about another assessment or an assessment in general. As I think people watching this would understand, is that there is a process, and when you get to what Charity and Beth do, you're really touching on areas that the kids feel that they're not capable. When you're looking at the math, the writing, the spelling, those are things that they had previously feared that their abilities were poor, and that's what we're going to demonstrate in front of their parents. After they go through this process, the dynamic process, where we can have a conversation with the children rather than saying, this is what you need to do, you see this change in them from the moment they walked into the door of a little anxious, not excited about the process, to being invested in doing the best job that they can.
And I think part of the reason that happens is because we've talked a lot about the trans nature of the disciplines that are represented during an assessment, but I think it also applies to the children themselves, that we really work with the students in partnership. So it's not that there's something prescribed that is being done to them, but rather they're involved and encouraged to be involved in the process, so that the feedback is going both ways, from the clinician to the student and from the student to the clinician. And I think that's really a unique aspect of the assessment process here.
The demystification is another component of this, which is, I think, unique to this type of assessment, and is a fascinating thing. It's brief, but it's fascinating to watch how they've processed what's happened then throughout the morning, and had a little chance to think about it over their lunchtime. And to be able to say, here's what we know about you, here are the things that you do very well, and here are the things that are challenging for you. It's very unusual for the student to not be engaged by that process.
One of the things that I find very valuable working with this team is that we don't have to do it all by ourselves. You know, while one of us is working with a student, somebody else is working with a family, and because as clinicians we watch what's going on behind the mirror too, maybe I as a learning specialist, I'm talking to the teacher while the psychologist is working with the child and the family liaison is working with the family, and it's a whole wraparound so that we are supporting them completely in that day, so that the family and the teachers can reinforce for the student. So the student doesn't have to take the onus all on him or herself.
And I think our own expertise and our own individual lenses, so to speak, that we view the children through become enhanced when we share our perception, our insight, when we bring our professional background, our professional development, our education, our experience to this shared conversation. All of a sudden, I'm seeing things and understanding things that I might not have before. And it's just incredibly valuable to have that opportunity to widen my professional lens, to gain vocabulary and concepts and skills to then use to empower these learners.
I think that really speaks to the comprehensive nature in some ways of what we do with all of the different disciplines coming together. That there's, you know, little pieces, and we put it all together, and we have these, you know, we have the puzzle. We actually have puzzle pieces, and that's what all of us coming together really create and fill in those pieces that any one discipline might not have. And I think that is invaluable for really getting a perspective on a student as a whole person, and whether that's in school or in their family or on a sports team. It's a whole person perspective.
Because it's not the pediatrician looking at the student and the psychologist looking at the student and the learning specialist looking at the student. It's the team looking at the student.
Or even the parents looking at the student. It's all, or the teacher looking at the student, or the learning specialist that comes from the school looking at there are so many perspectives that come together, and the cognitive shifts that occur are dramatic.
Well, I think that you guys have all given us, the audience, an excellent example of how committed you are to children and to making sure that they are as successful as they can be in their lives, and a glimpse of how a transdisciplinary approach can facilitate that process. And thank you very much.
Structure of which which we didn't follow, but it wasn't the flow or the dynamic or the fluid nature of the process. And that is actually the transdisciplinary model, is the merging and the blending of the disciplines, and you can't separate them out in that same way. And so I just think that what this conversation was an example of that.
We covered every single point on the sheet. We just didn't do it in the order.
That's very cool.